6:30 in the morning, we're setting off on an epic adventure. Last week, Microsoft decided to drag my British bald head halfway around the world to attend the Microsoft Flight Simulator Global Preview event, which was the first time media and press had a chance to get some hands-on experience with the new Microsoft Flight Simulator. As you can see, each filthy, undeserving influencer got their own call centre booth with their name written upon the side of it, along with a Logitech G-Satec Pro flight yoke, the TPR Thrustmaster Pendular rudder system, and of course an early alpha version of the simulator to try. And I'm sorry to say, in its alpha state right now, this simulator is absolutely bloody fantastic. I mean, absolutely mind-blowing. Now, let's not get too carried away. It was an alpha version of the game. There were some bugs, there were some niggles, there were some graphical artifacts, the stuff that you typically expect from an alpha. And you know, you hope that they'll fix it by the time the game actually launches, but who knows if they actually will. That aside, this simulator addresses the issues that us filthy casual flight simmers always bring up when it comes to flight sims. The first biggest one isn't even the graphics, which, I mean, come on, look at that, guys. Look at that. Not even talking about the graphics. The first one is that flicking through the menus and messing around with this game, which unfortunately I can't show in this video because we were forbade from filming the screen, so you've just got B-roll here whilst I talk. There's definitely a really concerted effort by the developer to make this a approachable simulator. Just the basic things like the control menu screen, how it's laid out, how easy it is to assign the different controls and change things and see what you've done. When it comes to doing a flight, picking the airport that you want to depart from, the one you want to arrive at, and how you want to do it, the time of day, the weather, all of it was just really clean and unobtrusive, unobnoxious. The type of thing where you go, oh, I've got a bit of an inkling to play a flight sim, let's load it up, let's jump in a plane, and let's fly and enjoy it. The game just accommodated that, and my God, I wish other simulators did this. Some do, most don't, but it looks like they're totally on the right path with this title in getting something that's super accessible and easy to just get into. Now, I know what you're thinking. Oh God, it's a consolitis, arcade, boring, not simulator flying game. Well, to dispel that worry, Microsoft decided to have us play the Cessna in the simulator, and then, mere moments later, jump into the real-world version of the plane for the ultimate sim versus reality comparison. Thing compared to the simulator? Well, the first thing you notice in reality is that reality comes with full motion simulation, and unfortunately the simulators we were using didn't. Though Microsoft Flight Simulator should support motion simulation in the future, so we'll have to look out for that. But in the real plane, you just notice all those real subtle details that are conveyed through the G-forces. From the pockets of air that you're moving over, the different air currents, the little yaw movements of the aircraft, the vibrations, everything that's going on, you just feel through your body and you just feel directly connected to the aircraft, informing you exactly how much you need to input on the flight yoke to get the aircraft to do what you want it to do. Crucially, despite the lack of feel in the simulator compared to reality, one thing that I noticed straight away was the general nature of the plane in reality and the general nature of the plane in the simulator and how close they were. In terms of the yoke inputs to get the plane to do what I wanted it to do in reality, it really wasn't that different from what I was doing in the simulator. Rather shockingly was the way that when you turn into a corner, how you then have to turn out of it manually to get the plane to then level off. But don't get me wrong, the plane does auto-level to some extent, but you do have to counter-correct in a way, and you also have to do that in the simulator, and it's not something I particularly noticed in other simulators. And if I'd just played the Microsoft Flight Simulator, I probably would have thought, oh, you know, that seems a little bit off with the physics. But the real plane did exactly the same thing. Another thing that I really noticed was how the plane's pitch responded to roll, and how much the plane would pitch down or up depending on how you rolled it and what other inputs you did. Again, that aspect seemed really similar in the simulator and in real life. It was actually quite spooky in a way, because I don't have any experience of flying real-world planes, how you could just go from the sim to real life and have a real expectation for everything. Now, I do have quite a bit of experience playing X-Plane 11, and again, I think in many ways that simulator also lined up to this real-world experience. And the thing was, with the original Microsoft Flight Simulator, I never really liked small aircraft in that because they always felt too rigid, almost as if you're flying a brick that kind of just goes where you point it with nothing in between. And X-Plane 11 doesn't do that. X-Plane 11, you always feel as if you're floating. And I'm really glad to say that the new flight sim also captures that, and it's also extremely apparent in reality. It feels as if you're driving a car that instead of having wheels connected to the ground, you have wheels connected to the air. I would say though, reality still beats out all the simulators in that things just feel more connected, partly from the G-forces, but there just seems to be a sense of more depth to the mass of the vehicle, how that's moving around and what's going on. Reality is still better than the simulators, but the simulators and Microsoft Flight Simulator comes pretty damn close. Lastly, talking specifically about physics, one thing I noticed I was atrocious at in the real plane was the rudder control. That's the foot pedals which control the yaw of the rear of the plane. And I was finding it really tricky to coordinate the rear of the plane or the foot pedals whilst turning to get the plane to follow itself into the corners in a really nice way. Whenever I turned the plane, it was a little bit janky, but whenever the co-pilot and the trainer turned the plane, it was smooth as butter. Interestingly, the rudder pedals also felt as if they were like load cells and required quite a lot of pressure to get the rear of the plane to actually yaw. Maybe the rudder pedals are hydraulic more so than the flight yoke, and maybe the flight yoke's not hydraulic at all and just connects directly to the ailerons on the wing. But you definitely notice the flight yoke is a sort of one-to-one input, whereas the rudder pedal feels more like a pressure-based input, which was quite interesting to me because it's something that I had no expectation for, and no rudder pedal controller that I've ever used has captured that real-world feeling that I got from the real plane. Now, an important question that I personally needed answering was, is it possible to drift a Cessna in the air? So I asked the instructor if I could give it full-on rudder and counter steer whilst flying, trying to keep the plane going in the direction that we were going, and just see what happened. And surprisingly, the instructor said, "Yeah, give it some counter steer." And there we go. Look at that. You can see us moving in the cockpit as the G's push us into the door. Fortunately, the door's closed, otherwise we might have fallen out of it. But you can see there, with the rudder fully depressed, you can counter steer it and you can hold the plane in the direction that you want to go. You also notice the engine note change and the pitch of the plane alter a little bit. And we were trying to adjust that on the flight yoke, not 100% successfully, but a fairly decent job, I think, for my first ever Cessna drift. In terms of doing the same thing in the simulator, you can use the yaw the pedals and you can hold it a bit, but it's not quite as stable or as deep as it was in reality. Didn't quite get the sound changes in the simulator that we got in reality as well. Though, having said that, sound is something they've done really, really well in the new Microsoft Flight Simulator. They've recorded all the audio properly in the cockpits, and then they've got multiple audio channels that capture things like the cockpit or the plane flexing and that creaky noise that you heard when we took the plane off. You get that in this simulator, and it adds so much to immersion. And it's something that a lot of games, not even just simulators, but a lot of games in general, don't do particularly well. And sound is a huge component for immersion and realism. And the new Microsoft Flight Sim absolutely nails the sound. It's not quite as good as reality, but it's easily the best attempt at capturing the audio experience of flying inside of a real plane. So I'm really excited to see what the final versions of the sim will be like with its audio, and if eventually they do ever add VR support to it, which they're not for the initial version. If they do, how that audio will then go with VR and with the graphics, it's just going to be absolutely mind-blowing. Segueing on to graphics, and I have to say, as nice as Microsoft Flight Simulator looks, it doesn't have the same fidelity as reality, unfortunately. I mean, there's just so many different types of grass in reality. How could any sim compare to it? Stuff that really matters, though, well, I mean, let's be honest, grass is the most important thing, but other stuff that matters as much as grass, the cockpit and the actual plane internals are all just absolutely spot on in the simulator. And I think pretty much all the dials operate. Some of it wasn't fully exposed in the alpha. I don't know to what extent stuff's going to be operational, but I believe all of it effectively will be clickable, which would be awesome. But visually, the actual texture details and the sort of dirt and damage on the cockpit really mirrored the actual real world cockpit. It's something that's had a bit of wear and tear, and it's being used a bit. In terms of the actual scenery outside of the cockpit, you know, real life definitely looked a lot better than the simulator. But when you compare Microsoft Flight Simulator to other flight simulators on the market, you know, it's absolutely unbelievable the amount of objects that Microsoft Flight Simulator is rendering, and the fact that it's got the whole Earth in there, and that it builds all these 3D buildings and objects and roads and things off the Microsoft map data that Microsoft's collected. And that's a combination of the actual satellite aerial imagery, and then individual models that they've built, and laser scans of terrain, and all that data set that Microsoft's collected, they've tried to then push into this simulator, which is then combined with a really spectacular procedural engine that also generates 3D geometry from 2D texture maps. So there's a whole load of stuff going under the hood to get the graphics that you see in the new Microsoft Flight Simulator, stuff that I'll probably need to cover in another video, talk in more depth and be more specific about. But the main thing is one of the first sims where, out of the box, without, it's probably not going to come in a box, it'll be digital, out of the download, you have a fully fledged, essentially photo terrain sim with photo buildings and stuff that the nearest comparable thing would be if you got something like Prepare 3D, Microsoft Flight Simulator or X-Plane 11, and then you bought a whole bunch of packs for various locations and then stuck that into it. And even then, I don't think those look in totality as good as Microsoft Flight Simulator does. But it's going to be really interesting when Flight Sim actually comes out to do a direct comparison with a fully modded version of X-Plane 11 or the Prepare 3D and compare it with the out-of-the-box version of the new Microsoft Flight Sim. Now, a big thing with Flight Sims is, of course, weather. And again, this has full weather in it. You can see there on the windscreen the rain darting across the windshield, and all the different types of weather are supported in this sim. I don't think they've got snow yet, and I don't think they've got full seasons confirmed, but the basic sorts of weather, fog, the different types of cloud, the cloud at the different heights, and then all that stuff affecting the physics appropriately and affecting the plane in an interesting way, is all in the simulator, out of the box, planned for the initial launch version of the game. Which is pretty much unheard of. With the current flight simulators, generally the out-of-the-box weather experience is normally a little bit flimsy and maybe works okay, but often visually looks a bit pants. Whereas this, even when we were messing around with it, even with this pre-alpha version, the weather just looked absolutely phenomenal. Now, in reality, with the Cessna, we did get to fly through a little bit of a cloud, but not much happened. A little bit of turbulence, but, you know, it was a fairly smooth day for flying, so we couldn't directly compare the experience of potentially dying by flying a Cessna into a thunderstorm. What a shame. But messing around with stuff on the simulator, just all the out of the box weather was phenomenal, and the different times of day, and then the sun going through gaps in the cloud and lighting up bits of terrain in the distance, and you could see how the cloud affected the lighting, and you have rainbows because rainbows are really important, especially in Seattle. You need that rainbow there. You've got the light shafts, you've got the clouds casting shadows on clouds. It's just too much to take in. When you initially jump into it, it's just like, oh, okay. And that is quite an overwhelming thing in reality, is there's a lot to take in. And I think that is really where the new Microsoft Flight Simulator actually shines the most. It's the sort of emergent end result of it, which is when you're in the real plane, the things that are hard aren't really the basic flying. I mean, if you're going to fly really smooth, especially in turbulent weather, that's probably quite tricky. I wasn't exactly smooth. There's improvement to be made there. But, you know, not killing yourself isn't particularly hard in a real plane when it comes to the basic flying. What is hard, and I think actually takes a lot of practice in a real plane, is flying it smoothly to a basic level, but then combining that with complete awareness of all the other aeroplanes around you, being aware exactly where they are and tracking them, whilst also then following correct flight procedure, whilst also then communicating with the air traffic control and communicating with it properly, with you finally then actually flying to the destination and knowing exactly where you are based off the terrain if you're flying VFR, i.e. what you can see rather than flying from instrumentation and directions from the air traffic control. That, I think, is what Microsoft Flight Simulator will ultimately capture better than any other simulator that's come out to date. So ultimately, this sort of early pre-alpha experience has absolutely blown me away. Flying the real plane was pretty damn amazing, I have to say. As an experience, all I can say is don't ever do it, guys, because you'll want to do it again. And like all these things that are incredibly fun, it's bloody expensive. Unless you're a YouTuber and Microsoft pays for it. But if you're paying for it yourself, it's bloody expensive. Though, you can do glider lessons quite cheap. Oh, God. The instructor did tell me he was going to try his hardest to get me hooked on flying. Oh, dear. Can't take this. Motorsport and flying. Oh, best things to get involved in on a budget. Now, of course, before we finished the flight, I did ask the instructor a couple of things. One, I wanted to do a stall in the plane. He was like, why? Why? But he said, okay, we could try it. But then, unfortunately, the cloud cover was such that we wouldn't have been able to get the altitude. And if we'd done a stall, then we probably would have crashed into Gabe Newell's garden or the Microsoft campus, which I wouldn't have minded. But it's not good for the health of the plane or your spine. So we couldn't do that. I did, however, convince him to do as tight a turn as he was comfortable with, which was pretty cool. It felt as if we were pulling round about 1.5, 2G as we went round the corner, and really interesting having that force pushed down on you and you're feeling it in your arms and your whole body into your seat, and then looking out the window to the left and being able to see the ground horizontal to you, but you're in your seat and it's perfectly fine. Super smooth sustained G-forces though, way smoother than any roller coaster I've been on, and just longer sensation of that G-force than any roller coaster I've been on, with you fully in control of it, which it just made it so satisfying. I mean, this just made me want to go in an aerobatic aeroplane. I think if you're one of those people that has a bit of a G-force addiction, then you absolutely love flying. The other thing we got to do was give it the full gas and remove the gas and see how much the plane responded to that. And it was actually quite surprising. You could really feel the plane accelerate and deaccelerate as you push the gas in and out on the plane. I don't know why I was expecting anything different. It literally felt exactly like if you had a road car and you slap your foot on the accelerator, but you were doing it in the air. So that was a fun and novel experience. And then finally we had a good fiddle with the trim, and setting the trim all the way down and up, and then counteracting it using the yoke to feel the actual forces on the yoke to hold it, and then setting the trim so that you could then let go of the yoke and the plane would fly level. Interestingly, I'd say the forces from the yoke in terms of the pushing in and the pushing out for going down and up was probably about 4 or 5 Newton meters, if that. Of course, with the equipment we were using to play Microsoft Flight Simulator, it was a non-force feedback flight yoke. There are force feedback flight yokes on the market. There's one company making them. Brunner, I think, is the only company making them at the moment. And I have to say, after flying the real plane and feeling the forces through the yoke and the foot pedals, it really does make me want to play Microsoft Flight Simulator with a force feedback flight yoke, especially for stuff like trim, especially for stuff like feeling the loading of the plane. And then with the motion rig, I can totally see how, not for G-force replication, but for heave specifically, the up-down motion of the plane, which you really feel when you go through pockets of air or if you do abrupt movements. Having that heave on a motion rig, I think, would be really valuable for understanding what the plane's doing and making the simulator a lot more immersive and a lot more believable. So, as I say, with Microsoft Flight Simulator, they haven't confirmed force feedback support or motion rig support in the current version, but it's definitely something I think they're looking at, and there's no reason why it wouldn't export out to those things, so it makes sense for them to do it. So, force feedback flight yoke, here we come. Motion rig, here we come. Microsoft Flight Simulator, here we come. Kind of just driving simulator should be enough. Now it's the combo. We're getting old. We're going to need a motion rig for train simulators eventually. But yeah, I mean, there's not really much more I can say really in this video, other than the fact that it was absolutely incredible. Both the simulator and the real thing. Really, there's no confirmed dates for when the public are going to be able to access the game as it is right now. They're going to roll it out gradually. They're doing a sort of private beta and then a somewhat public beta, and then they'll do a release later on. I think the schedule is some point in 2020 for the actual full release of the game. It really encouragingly, from talking to the developer, it looks like they're keen to just keep maintaining it, keep working on it. They're not looking to just run and drop this. They're looking to have something that's sustained and gets better over time, which is really encouraging. And as I say, they're definitely going for, this is the next generation of Microsoft Flight Simulator, which is what we all wanted, or all flight sim fans really wanted. Yeah, I mean, I'm going to have to do more videos on this. I can't keep talking in this one. We're all going to die of old age again. I like to keep the videos under half an hour. So, really, just keep your eyes peeled. Go on the Microsoft Flight Sim website. Follow their Twitter and keep yourself abreast of any updates and announcements they're doing. And of course, we'll be posting announcements on our YouTube channel and covering the game as it progresses through to its launch. what better place to end our video from our epic Microsoft Flight Simulator Seattle journey than on the most obvious of places. This is an active volcano. So I'd just like to say a huge thanks to everyone at Microsoft, a huge thanks to everyone at Acebo Games, huge thanks to everyone for sorting everything out. Absolutely amazing time that we've had here, and I'm telling you guys, you're all going to be absolutely blown away by Microsoft Flight Simulator when it comes out. So I'm looking forward to that. But thanks everyone for watching this video. Don't forget to click the subscribe button. Don't forget to hit the like button, and also remember to hate YouTubers because their life is too easy.